Kia ora, welcome to Under the Checkered Flag, MotoGP edition. I'm your host Kate, and we're just going to jump right in. So we have just had 4 incredible races at Portimao, and while I am all keen to jump right in, this week we're going to start with PozzA, who's going to chat about Moto3, so that I don't just jump straight in to Moto2, which is what I really want to do. But first, Moto3.
It was a pretty good race in Moto3 as it usually is. Um, as I said last recording, top four I felt was pretty set in stone. But starting from P3 was Ivan Ortola. Um, much better result than Qatar, obviously since he finished without crashing. Um, Second was Jose Antonio Vareda. Um, Again, better than last time because he did finish. Got his first podium of the year. First dry weather podium as well in his career. And Danny Holgado won the race. Um, he was in sort of first, second, third for pretty much the entirety of the race. Seemed pretty comfortable. Yeah. Any anything you noticed or?
I think it was a really good race. I do just want to mention one thing I found interesting, and that was David Alonso. He was quite strong in this race, but I feel like he peaked a bit too early. He's definitely someone who needs to get to the lead at the end of the race, I think, to be able to keep the race, because he did come in P4. And while we're there, I do just want to shout out to Joel Kelso because he's Australian and he finished P5. So that's great work for Kelso too.
Just looking a bit further down the field as well. Joel Esteban, the rookie, finished P8. Top in this race, and the only other rookie in the points was Jacob Ralston in P11.
That's pretty impressive for Ralston because that's 2 weeks in the points in his rookie season. So I definitely am quite excited to see what more he can do. So with that very short summary of Moto3, which I'm perfectly happy about because it means I can now talk about Moto2, which I've wanted to do all day, and no one in my actual real life is interested. But anyway, I'm going to start with the podium. Manu Gonzalez in P3, really quite a great performance from him. There were lots of good battles in this race, I think, and him battling with his teammate, they were going toe to toe, and I just really enjoyed watching it. Up ahead of him was Joe Roberts, the American, and this I think is going to be a very strong performance coming into Kota, obviously his home race. I think this result will mean that we'll get a lot more attendance. It's a bit more excitement. That plus Trackhouse being up in MotoGP. I think it's just an exciting time and lots of potential for American racing. But obviously, I am over the moon because my prediction came true. I mean, I didn't doubt it for a second, and yet many people did because in his 4th year in Moto 2, after 70 Moto 2 Grand Prix starts and 15 second places, Aron Canet has finally taken his win. And if you're watching this in the YouTube video, I will be posting as many possible clips that I can have yoinked because I'm so ridiculously happy. It has been 75 races since Aron Canet last won a Grand Prix, and that was in Moto 3 in Aragon in 2019 when he was riding a KTM. And I know quite a few people online have been a bit, for lack of a better word, dickish, saying that he only won because Lopez crashed out. But this is racing. You sort of have to finish to win the race. So either way, doesn't matter, and I genuinely don't care that Lopez sort of lost the race. It's still 100% Aron Canet's win, and I'm so ridiculously happy. And I was like so tearing up and emotional because I wanted this for so long. And yeah, um, that's my little Aron Canet rant. I think I was quite well behaved there. Do you want to go on to other talking points in Moto 2? Because I do actually have a few more, but passing to you.
One of the things that I was just thinking of was you think of the amount of times that Canet was out in the lead and gifted it by crashing or making mistakes to all of the other riders. It just sort of felt like eventually he had to be on the receiving end of that gift, which in this race he was. Um, but even then, he still, I think Lopez only crashed at about like half race distance, so he still had to keep pushing for half the race pretty much. And he kept the gap to the group behind him pretty consistent. Um, Obviously, bit lucky with Aldeguer getting a double long lap with the jump start because realistically he could have dominated this race. But again, that's racing.
I totally agree with that. And on that consistency, I think from memory, and I may have to check this, but it was only lap 1 and then lap 20 and 21 that Canet wasn't in the 142s. So for the rest of them, it was 3 laps he wasn't, you know. Sorry, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but what I'm trying to say is he was doing 142s for 17 laps, one of those being the first lap, it doesn't count. And the last two, I mean, that celebration, when he knew he won, that was not really, indicative of his time. And yeah, it was just a really quite a wholesome win. And I am just gonna keep Kate splaining for a second because I've seen online a lot of people asking about the bow tie and how after he won his first win, we'd hear about the bow tie. So last year, Aron Canet did explain the bow tie, and if you don't know what this is, it is he would wear a bow tie on every podium, and it became sort of like this, I don't know, meme, this thing that people wanted to find out why he was doing this, and he always said that after his first win, he would tell people why it was. In September last year, Canet crashed out of the lead. As PozzA said, he's done it a fair few times, and he actually spoke about the bow tie. Basically, he wears it because he was, what's the word? Discriminated against, maybe? That could be a little bit harsh terminology, but his wording was the bow tie is a sign in the direction of some people inside and also outside the paddock who have discriminated against me without knowing me just because I have tattoos. Now, as someone who's like heavily tattooed, I say heavily tattooed, I've got a sleeve and a half and a bunch of others. I'm just like, oh yeah, I kind of feel that. So if you didn't know that was the reason behind the bow tie, that's the reason. If you did, well, thanks for listening to me ramble anyway. The, I suppose, final thought I have on Moto 2 is just something PozzA touched on before. Firmin Aldeguer jumping the start and that double long lap penalty. He still finished in P4, which was an absolutely incredible ride. Like, seriously, seriously incredible. But yeah, that's my Moto 2 ramblings over. I think I did quite well because I thought I'd go for 20 minutes. I've only gone for like 8.5.
In that ramble, I ended up getting like the lap chart up. The only laps that Canet was out of the 142s was obviously the first lap, lap 12, which was a 143.1, and the last 2 laps, which was a 143.2 and a 143.5. It's pretty consistent across the board.
Yeah, I really wasn't far off. I was one lap off. But overall, very consistent, and I'm very happy he's got his win. I hope this is the start of his title charge.
Just one final note from me. Top rookie in the points was Senna Agius in P14. Being Australian, obviously slightly biased with that, but I think he did a pretty good job.
Which, while PozzA will go on to chat about the sprint, one thing I do want to say before we get into that is we don't have any Kiwis. I'm a Kiwi. We don't have any Kiwis in the Grand Prix paddock. But this weekend, every single Australian scored points, and I'm going to claim that because I am Kiwi and PozzA is Australian, so it totally counts.
Moving on to the MotoGP sprint race. It was. It wasn't a bad sprint race. There's probably been more exciting ones, but overall it was pretty decent. Just jump right in with the podium. Jorge Martin, shockingly, didn't win a sprint race for a change. He was in third. Second, Kate would have been happy with this. Marc Marquez got his first podium on a Ducati. And the winner ended up being Maverick Vinales from Aprilia. Um, Technically, he's now won races on three different bikes. Obviously, that stat doesn't completely count because it wasn't a full length Sunday race. But yeah, nothing really else. Anything that you thought was interesting?
The only thing that I think we can add to that, and that's only because it does sort of lead into the Grand Prix, is I want to talk about Miguel Oliveira. Obviously, he's the home hero. This is his home race, but he's also won an Aprilia, and he spoke after the sprint. I honestly haven't looked up his post race comments, but after the sprint, he said that his launch device didn't activate, which does sort of bring us into Aprilia's reliability issues, which was without a doubt one of the biggest talking points of the Sunday race. You did touch on the fact that the sprint wasn't the most exciting. Personally, I think it was still pretty exciting, but I do think it was incredibly overshadowed by how exciting the Grand Prix was. It's not often that we see a Grand Prix that's so much more exciting than the sprints, but this one certainly was. Admittedly, it started really exciting, like you build up to the Sunday race, and then it starts and that bit's exciting, and then it did turn into a bit of a snooze fest between, I don't know, maybe lap 5 and 10, and then it just, you know, stuff hit the fan, and I have to not swear because then the YouTube algorithm is like, nah, no views. So stuff hit the fan, and stuff hit the fan quite dramatically in a lot of senses, I suppose. But I'll just actually start with the podium because I probably need to start with the podium. In P3 was the rookie Pedro Acosta, and I'm sure that we'll discuss him quite a bit because I have so much to say there. In P2 was Enea Bastianini, and yeah, like I get these warm fuzzies with Enea because of his accident last year here. P1, same thing, I get these warm fuzzies. In the press conference, Jorge Martin, our race winner, said that his career almost ended here, and now he's won here. It's just like quite this like wholesome bubble there, but just that podium doesn't sort of capture how dramatic this race was. What would you consider is your event of the Grand Prix? Because there's certainly quite a lot of them.
Overall, the race was pretty decent. First half, maybe, but obviously it all drama really kicked off with fourth, maybe 4 to 3 laps to go. Um, Obviously, the first of the big talking points was the collision between Marc Marquez and Pecco Bagnaia. It's nice seeing the stewards not making like really controversial calls again. But yeah, obviously the next big talking point was Maverick Vinales' gearbox issue. Um, yeah, second coming on to last lap, second last lap, somewhere around there. Um, Heading down into turn one. I believe he'd been having a couple of problems with it a lap or two prior, but from what I could see, it sort of just looked like as he got to the runoff, a mixture of the runoff being really dusty and dirty, um, and it sort of looked like his rear tire locked up for a split second or two, just as he ran over maybe a couple of bumps as well. Sent him over on a high side. Obviously, allowed Pedro Acosta to come through and get his first podium. Yeah, anything else?
Yeah, I totally agree that the Mark and Pecco crash was a racing incident because it was. These were two racers that were fighting for that same piece of tarmac. Admittedly, from I've watched a few of the post race interviews and they are very cold towards each other. I can just imagine how much this would kick off if it was Mark and Marco Bezzecchi, because there's definitely no love lost between them. And that does play into, I think, maybe a certain narrative that could be strung with Mark and Pecco. But I also kind of see this like huge respect the two of them have for each other. And obviously, I'm a Marc Marquez fangirl. I'm not a huge Pecco fan. Like, I respect everything he's done and things like that. Still can't really get over that drink driving conviction. But anyway, they weren't going to yield to each other. They're both angry at each other, but they both can't call each other out, really, because they're both at fault. And in that same sense, no one's at fault. On to the Maverick issue. This is just so much Aprilia. Like, I feel like every 4 or 5 races, Aprilia have a good race, but one of them suffers from this huge technical issue, and I feel like Mav cops a lot of it. I go back to when he had his technical issue. Oh gosh, I can't remember what race it was last year. It was the last lap, same sort of thing. That if there was just one more lap, he would have been fine. And it's not like Alicia Spargro's one more lap. It's one more lap and the bike would have actually survived. Because last time it was his chain that broke, this time it was his gearbox. And I read an interview with him that said from, like you said, lap 6, you said he had these issues way before. He said from lap 6 he couldn't go from 5th to 6th. And he feels that if he had actually been able to, use his gearbox like a gearbox should be used, he could have actually fought for the win. And I feel like he's going to be really frustrated at the moment because I would be. As someone in the Discord server said, I wouldn't even talk to my team. I would have just hopped on a plane home because, yeah, that was quite frustrating. And it does seem to happen to him quite a lot.
Moving on to the little Japanese Manufacturers Cup thing that we've decided to keep track of this year. Um, Across both of the races, sprint race and the main race, it was Fabio Quartararo who finished highest up. Yeah, this year and last year. But in the sprint race, Quartararo finished in P9, which gave him a singular point. And in the main race, he finished in 7th, which gave him 9 points, so 10 points total for the weekend. The other Japanese manufacturer riders in the points in the main race were Joan Mir in P12, Alex Rins in P13, and Zarco in P15.
Did you straight up just skim over Takanakagami, who finished in P14?
I'm like 90% sure I said this. I'm 90% sure I said this in the other server. I forget Nikigami exists sometimes.
Yeah, we all do. And actually, I might keep this in because in the Riders Parade that we have, this is terrible because you and I do this for fun. This isn't our job. And as much as we'd like this to become successful, it's just like we're here rambling about MotoGP. Jack Appleyard was presenting the MotoGP Riders Parade and he forgets Taka Nakagami. And the worst part is the camera's on Taka and you see him realize he's been forgotten and oh my god, it breaks my heart. Like that was such a bad moment. Oh dear. So yeah, we often forget Taka because it is time for the prediction results. And I'll start with Moto3 because PozzA came out slightly on top. He got Holgado and Ortola, whereas I only got Holgado. So he came away from Moto3 with 20 points. I only came away with 5 points. No, 15 points. So there was only 5 points difference. I have to admit, I made it up on the next day because obviously Moto2, I had Aron Canet. So that's another 15 points to me because I believed in Aron Canet, at least in the podcast predictions. It's like the only place I believed in him, which is a bit savage. But PozzA got Canet MP2 and Gonzalez, he got correct. MP3. In the sprint for MotoGP, we both had Martin MP1. We were both wrong, but we got half a point because he did still end up on the podium. I got 5 points for P2, which I had Mark correct, and I got half a point for Maverick Vinales being on the podium, but I had him in the wrong place. PozzA had Marc Marquez on the podium in P3, which was the wrong place. Then I just didn't show up in the race predictions. In fact, my race predictions were terrible. Looking back at it, I had Pecco, Maverick Vinales, and Marc Marquez, all who crashed out. So that's a bit terrible. Whereas PozzA, he got Jorge Martin for the win. So well done to PozzA, who wins this week with 42 to my 36. I'm still winning, so I'm still taking it like as a win. I have 67 points and PozzA has 48 points.
I'm gonna get pretty much everything wrong in Coda anyway, so
I mean, I've already put Mark down for P1 for both the sprint and the race. So you could at least match me on those predictions and then you can't lose to those P1 predictions. I mean, I don't even think I'd put Rins in the podium at this stage because Yamaha is just Yamaha. So that is our Portugal roundup. And as you may or may not hear, my dog is starting to tippy tap in the background. But before we go, I absolutely do want to know what you guys thought of the race. I want to know if you think that incident between Mark and Pecco was just a racing incident or if it was something more. I'm so curious as to see if your predictions and how you thought this race was going to play out actually played out. So do let us know in the comments, and we will be back here every Tuesday. So if you're enjoying it, like and subscribe, and we will see you next week.